Hey, everybody, I'm Sean Robinson,
Carson Grubaugh.
and we're Living the Line. And today we're going to talk about a book that I think both Carson and I have a lot to talk about, but hopefully we can condense all of that a lot into a little in the sense of, being able to distill it all.
And by the
Which,
way, this is sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think what Carson was about to say is that this is a video that was selected by our Patreon members. And we'd like to thank those patrons for giving us the support and also for being patient as we sort of work our way through this process of figuring out what it is that people want, how we can give it to them, and how we can carve enough time into the day to do it. We've had a lot of questions for people. Will you do this type of thing? Will you do that type of thing? We will try. And the biggest thing we can do to tell you at the moment is that, if you have a few dollars to spare, and you would really like to, help us create this content, being a member of our Patreon is the best way to do it. We do answer questions there. We have some discussion. There's some just fantastic people who have been supporting us on there, and we really do appreciate it. And this book was selected by them, I think, for some probably obvious reasons. What book are we going to be talking about, Carson?
We're going to be talking about Sam Kieth's The Maxx. And I think what they really wanted to see was us recreate some of his art and pick apart the ink techniques. But I'm excited to talk about the book itself too. And we'll try and do that once a month or so. Like run a poll and see what people want us to talk about. It's just hard to like get to that and all the other stuff we're doing. But yeah, thank you guys. Saw the poll and I was kind of mentally going that one. So I'm pretty excited to talk about it. Yeah, I have the cliffhanger DC edition. I know IDW did some like recolor ones called Maximized, and I'd like to get those, but those have sold out and are super expensive, but I think they were nice hardcovers. So I don't when did you first encounter? I was actually surprised because you tend to stay away from the American stuff, that you obviously had a relationship to this book already.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's weird. It hit the sweet spot where I had read a bunch of superhero stuff in middle school and, had briefly been engaged with that stuff. And was specifically, weirdly enough, the last couple dozen issues of New Mutants and then X-Force. And then when X-Force, stopped being Rob Liefeld, I think I was 12 years old. So let's give me some, keep that in mind as we're talking here. When that transitioned into Image, I was very interested in that. And it coincided with my discovery of basically the other half of the comic store and reading titles like Cerebus and things like that. And checking out like, oh, hey, this Ninja Turtle thing that I'm really into. Look at this. There's these like gritty comics that have this grimy atmosphere to them. And it's really interesting to me. All these things were sort of going at the same time. And as I'm sort of transitioning away from superheroes, all of a sudden here's this superhero comic that's super grimy looking and has these very interesting themes. And I have to say it was a fairly odd experience reading these 20, how long has it been? We're talking 26 or 27, 25 or 26 years later. I read these first issues of the Maxx as they were coming out. And it was part of that sort of wave of like reading like more challenging material or just basically like different material. And realizing a couple issues in, or deciding a couple issues in, oh, hey, this is actually a superhero comic anyway, was actually a little bit like disappointing to me because it's like these first few issues, like it's like the trappings of it. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to the actual issues, but like the trappings of it might have some sort of whiffs of superhero stuff, but just the fact that like the fact of the Maxx, the fact of the psychological aspects of it, the fact that the dialogue is so damn good. Credit to Bill Messner-Loeb for that. There's all these things that sort of elevated it past the other genre stuff it was surrounded. But then, you start hitting like the issue where he's crossing over with Pitt and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, right, this is still a superhero book. Like it's an interesting.
So did you get off board at some point when it got too superhero? You checked out?
I did, yeah, because I was reading other stuff at the time, and that was just it. But weirdly enough, and I want to say this for anybody who's has read the Max and loved the Max, this was not my first Sam Kieth experience, and my first Sam Kieth experience was not all of the covers that he did for Marvel Presents or whatever. I had read several Sam Kieth short stories that had been published in 1986 in the Fantagraphics collection Critters. So Critters was this Fantagraphics book that came out, I think, 6 times a year. That was an anthology title that had these very brief stories, and it was an early vehicle to translate some European stuff that wasn't available. It was the first place where Usagi Yojimbo was published, and I had an uncle who gave me a bunch of copies of Critters. And I read several Sam Kieth stories in that, and I was really fascinated by his dry brush technique. Even at the time, I was like, "Oh, look at this texture! What is this stuff?" And then his design, his character design, which, if you've never read those, the Critters episodes actually is in there.
Oh, okay. So
So
he had those little M&M looking guys.
yeah, which we're going to see in a minute when we're looking through the Max. But
Yeah.
these characters were in all of his Critter short stories, and there's this guy, this lizard guy, who hangs out with and I mean the stories are fairly nonsensical, like they'll repair a car, or they'll talk about the sun or whatever, but the visuals of it are so striking. And if I'm not mistaken, one of those Sam Kieth short stories are for sale right now, the entirety of the artwork. It looked like it was going for like $7,000 or something for an entire 10-page Sam Kieth short story from 1986.
Heritage.
No, one of the other original art sites.
Okay.
But anyway, so I was kind of primed to love the Max because I was like, oh my gosh, look at this art. And then I was like, hold on, it's that guy.
Yeah.
It's like it's that guy who draws the weird Wolverine thing, and it's that guy who drew those creepy little talking mouths that are now actually creepy.
They're part of the book.
Right.
So I'm surprised, actually. We'll have to read the whole thing then, because it's not a superhero book hardly ever. I think if you ran into a couple issues where it is a superhero book and then stopped, like, you missed out on the really good part of the Max. The later part, I think, after a lot of people had checked out and it quit making as much money, it became a really it's a book about abuse, basically, all the way through, and that ramps up more and more as the series goes. So maybe we'll keep going with it. I unlike you was way too deep into the Image stuff at that age. I'm a year younger than you, so
right. That's a big difference, though.
Not much excuse, but like Jim Lee was everything. Rob Liefeld was second best. And anything that didn't fit that mold, like, I wasn't looking at the other side. I don't think my comic shop had another side. The manga stuff that my friends were picking up, was like, all right, but I didn't quite get it. I wasn't mature enough, I don't think. I didn't become interested in more intellectual comics till my later teens. So I think at some point it was either me or my brother, but I think it was me. Someone gave me Max issue 2 for my birthday, and I was like, oh, thank you. Like, look through it. I'd kind of seen it already and been like, this just looks weird. And then I remember reading that issue and being like, this makes no sense. This is stupid. Why is this so popular? But I was like, thank you so much. You really know that I love comic books. So I put it aside. And then when these cliffhanger ones came out, because after that I had got into stuff like Zero Girl and For Women and Ojo and My Inner Bimbo and like all of the rest of Sam Kieth stuff I loved, but I'd never read the Max because I just was too stupid at the time. So I went back and got these, and it's an amazing series, and I was just too young to pick up what was going on, and rereading it now, I'm like, no wonder this didn't make sense to me at 11 or whatever. Like, they're talking about Camille Paglia and stuff like that. You know, it's a weird.
Yeah, let's take a look at the actual flip through. But yeah, I
Yeah,
was shocked at how well my brain had retained individual lines of dialogue from these first 3 or 4 issues,
really.
uh, without necessarily having a full understanding of it. Oh man, is that how they open up the collected edition with the box?
Yeah,
uh,
with his cardboard box. And this has the original coloring by Steve Olive and Ruben Rude. Um, it's been recolored now because this coloring, I don't know if it's just the printing, but the coloring's kind of dark. I love that he starts out with basically his Wolverine shot though,
right.
which is kind of the one that we're going to do when we do the inking.
Yeah, this is that first issue, the cover. Now, keep in mind, this is not the first appearance of the Max in terms of like his visual appearance. He was supposed to come out in a darker image, I think was the name of it,
Yeah,
anthology
and
that was
I had seen that because it had Jim Lee's Death Blow, so I bought
right.
that, and I had kind of liked that, but it was again the weird one.
But this is and he was also in like a Image Zero, I think it was called, that was supposed to ship with a certain Wizard issue, but then it came out later. Anyway, this is the image that people would have seen first in all the advertising and everything. And this is, like you said, it's essentially like his Wolverine Marvel Comics Presents splash page.
Yeah,
Very,
but
very
I was
interesting.
looking at it, and he definitely ramped back on the texture. He's like, I can't put in that much work anymore if I got to pump this out monthly. I'm not doing
Right.
like little 10 pagers for Marvel. But I love he opens. It's like right down the image, like it looks like a Spawn page, but like
Right.
run through a blender. You know, it's in an alley. It's like dark. It's got the black everywhere with the kind of lettering like they would do in Spawn, or the big black kind of gutters with, but this would be all like Todd McFarlane would, have like a whole book worth of dialogue right there. But they
Oh,
put
that's
like
interesting. So that first box is his cardboard box. It's not the later box that I was remembering. Um, that's interesting. Not the only prominently featured cardboard box in this series.
no,
The
it's
first
really
few
important,
issues.
especially as it goes later. There's whole like box forts that they build for the kids, and so that's what I'm saying. I think you
Wow.
actually have missed out on a lot
No, it
by
sounds like
not
I've only
reading
read
those
the
later
first
ones.
6 issues.
Yeah, the
I'm
later
very
issues get
excited.
really good. Um, yeah, and then it starts out like with the typical chick getting attacked in the alleyway, and then the superhero kind of coming and saving her.
Right.
But his play with panel shapes was one of the things that always interested me about Sam Kieth. And there's a lot of artists where they like when Dave did that, it always kind of added emotional, or it kind of added to the
Hmm.
story in some way. When Sam Kieth does it, I don't know what the hell it's adding to
Yeah.
anything other than just looking cool.
Yeah. These
Um,
little pieces. But then here's the church and state too. Narrow slices the so-called picket fence,
yeah, this
which
makes sense to me,
yeah.
like the bent panel and but some of the other stuff, and it's not even like he's given himself room compositionally. It's I just like I don't know where his decisions are coming from on some of this stuff, but it's so like like why is that little slice out of there?
I
Uh,
I tell you, aesthetically, as a kid, even though I was 13 years old when this is coming out, I remember being upset when I realized when you come to some of the pages that were hand painted, how glorious comic could have looked. Otherwise, um, after sort of seeing some of his hand painted art, I found the coloring to be kind of off putting. Not the color choice, but the sort of like everything is made of magnesium. Um, you and I talked about on text message before that whilst Pistachio, his wet works was like the perfect the perfect subject for this era of coloring when everything looks like a doorknob.
yeah, I mean that book was the first time I saw computer coloring look like, I was like, oh my god, these special effects are amazing. And again, I was like, I would not read anything that wasn't in color. Like Image color was the best. I love this stuff, like this
Right.
kind of coloring.
But looking at it now, it seems like it sort of subverts his inclinations to texture and his inclinations to high contrast, outer edge stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
and all of the texture could get lost in it. And I think that's maybe why he pulled back too, is he realized, why put in all that work when it's going to get lost in dark, muddy colors. And
right, when we're talking about texture, like look at this page on the left hand side here. You've got an extreme light source that's blowing out any detail in the light areas, and then you have all of the dark areas are actually made of sort of middle tone values that are built up through textural, hatch, like basically like really dirty hatching and brushwork. But you have a sort of like sameness imposed by the colorist, who's basically turning that blown out white area into a doorknob.
yeah, there's two doorknobs.
Right.
But yeah, like the donuts and stuff that are strapped to his feet. But you look at the Wolverine one that we're gonna ink when we're done with this, and there would have been like 5 times as much texture on it compared
Right.
to this. I love this too, though, that you get, and this is something I saw a lot of in the image, like in Wildcats #1, you have the imp, the Jacob Marlowe, the small guy. He's like curled up in the alleyway asleep. This like curled up figure was something I saw a lot then, but it's so it's like so not heroic, right? You're just curled up in a fetal position.
Right. We meet our hero, who's a homeless person who sleeps in a box. And
Supposedly, yeah.
right.
That kind of keeps shifting. Here's the is that you're talking about.
Yeah. So once again, those are borrowed from a short stories that he had at the time.
And
You think?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think this outfit would fly as a social worker?
No, definitely. I was going to say, this is the note I wrote, was that it's so Pauly Shore. Like if you go back to Pauly Shore, this looks like that. That wasn't even an era of clothing. It was just one guy that was making some weird kind of fashion statement in the early 90s. Yeah, no, there's no way if you showed up as a social worker that they'd allow that. It's such a peculiar style. But then in terms of his art style, I was making notes about who his influences must be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this is like Jeff Jones.
I was going to say Jeff Jones, damn it.
Yeah.
That's
Like
really wild.
With the like belly on the women. Jeff
Mm-hmm.
Jones always had that belly. I think of his in heavy metal, there was the No Age, I think it was called.
I don't
You
know
do
that
these little short 3-page stories. I think it was called No Age that Jeff Jones did. And then you're talking about Jeff Jones, obviously you got Frazetta. Idol, was that it?
Yeah, Idol, Idyll.
I think there was one called No Age as well.
Okay.
But anyways, Jeff Jones and Frazetta obviously writes, and then I see some Wally Wood here and there. But yeah, the Jeff Jones one is the one that keeps popping out to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. Once again, as a 12 or 13-year-old reading that, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." There's a girl who's fat in this comic, and now it's like I don't think that is not my reaction at all.
Oh, that she's fat? No, she's not fat at all.
Right.
She's actually pretty sexy.
Right. She's proportioned in one of the many ways that people can be proportioned. Like it's an interesting, like, what that was the cognitive dissonance I was talking about. Like, but I mean, that's also a testament to what my reading had been up to at that point, and the sort of homogeny of a certain kind of body type.
Oh yeah, totally.
And it's interesting that like a cartoonist could have a body type.
Well, and that's why I think that Jeff Jones is an interesting, because I guess technically we should say Jeffrey Catherine Jones.
Yeah, sure. And if someone is upset about that, my apologies. I'm not trying to denigrate anyone. He had a back and forth relationship with that particular identity. I would think it's safe to say. So sure, Jeffrey Catherine Jones.
But it's interesting that we are talking about a more realistic woman, and that would be an influence on Sam Kieth, because I've seen throughout Sam Kieth's career a real interest in the feminine. Mm-hmm. And like feminism, and he has another one called My Inner Bimbo that's about a guy that has like a kind of fairy inner bimbo self. So Sam Kieth has played a lot with gender identity, I think, in a way that's interesting, that his artistic influence is also Jeff
Mhm.
Jones, Jeffrey Catherine Jones. Um, I don't know. There seems to be some deeper connection to, because I've always seen that in. It's hard for me to, because I think of Jeff Jones, the artist that I knew, like, but a lot of pregnant women and a celebration of femininity
Mhm.
in the art too, and I see that in Sam Kieth as well. Here's what we're looking for from Wolverine. There's that hair.
And it's very interesting to sort of take a back seat for a moment. These are both wildly interesting visually, and also like you can just tell he's just leaned into his cartooning. Like, I'm gonna draw the figure that I want to draw. You know, you don't want to dissect the gentleman in the cape there and figure out, like, you know, how tall his torso is versus how tall his legs are. Um, but it works
And
perfectly as
he's
it is.
taking everything that everyone else is doing and then just like ramping it up to fight. It's like that spawns cape. And then you
Right.
take the gigantic muscles and you're like, I'm going to draw the biggest fucking triceps that you've ever seen. And then I'm going to take the hair. And I don't know. It's just, I
Just
don't know
cut
how
that.
this was so popular, but I'm glad it was, that it could go on for so long. Yeah, hear her sucking in her belly and then letting it out. Like, that's just a regular ass belly.
Right.
And
That's
I
a great
love
cover
that.
there. Yeah. That's really fantastic.
And I love this sequence here where the guy's talking about like, oh, my life is so boring, nothing happens, nothing, everything happens to everyone else. And as the Max is fighting Mr. Gone, like his big cape comes down, he's like, huh, that's weird. Like this gas station, they must be putting down like some kind of covering. And
It's
he's
weird that all
taking,
those old ladies are in the car over there.
yeah, which is the is, and it's an automatic sunshade. And okay, well, I'll pull on it. Oh man, oops, I accidentally activated it. And he continues to go through this fight, like not realizing that he's experiencing something extraordinary.
Right.
Like, that's just that character. And I love that people do go through life that way. I think that's a really acute observation of, people ask me like, how do you have so many stories? And it's like, I think I'm just seeing this, I've gone through the same stuff as anyone else has.
Right.
I've just seen them in a way that they're entertaining, and other people go through life and just see it as like normal stuff.
And you get a view of what the guy on that last page, the bottom panel, you get a view of what he's actually seeing when he's seeing the Max fighting the is there. All these
Yeah,
old ladies biting him, identical old ladies.
well, because like the is whatever you dress them up as is what people see them as, but
Right.
they still see them as short and weird versions of that.
Right.
Which is so strange.
Uh,
I'm
so
curious too, like how William Messner Loeb's, he just scripted it. It seems like Sam Kieth.
yeah, as far as I understand it, the relationship was just that he essentially wrote the words, and the words of these very early issues, as I was suggesting before, are actually really, I think, quite good. It never feels wordy; it just feels evocative, and all the characters have really distinct voices, and it clearly, I think that Keith maybe felt like he needed some kind of training wheels for this early portion of the book, and they had worked together on Epicurus the Sage, and
Love that.
Messenger
That's
Lobes is
such a
actually,
good book.
he's a really good cartoonist too, and he had actually done Journey, which was originally published by Aardvark Vanaheim, and then moved on to Fantagraphics at some point. Um, anyway, he's an excellent cartoonist in his own right, and I don't know if they had a falling out or whatever, or how he left the book, but all the dialogue here is just fantastic. Um,
I think Sam Kieth just eventually felt like he could take it over himself.
right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not like a historian of that kind of stuff, but it seems very Sam Kieth to me still. So it's, they must have had a pretty close relationship where he was telling him what, because it's so bizarre that you can't imagine that this was just like total Marvel style, where
No.
like there had to be some like, this is what I'm up to. If you
Hmm.
just randomly map dialogue on top of all this, it would be an impossible task.
Right.
to hold it together. I love this design right here. The cow where you squirt its tail and it shits out soap and then squirts water out of the udders.
What
That's
do
the
you think
kind of
of
stuff that, like, if you got handed that and you had to just script it without talking to the artist, it wouldn't make any sense. Like, what do I do with that?
what do you think of these little mucha style panel noodlings?
This stuff, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like, it seems purely stylistic. I don't think it contributes anything other than making it weird.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know. It almost looks like letters, but it never is. Something about this bulldog makes me think of Jeff Darrow. Like,
Hmm.
I feel like I've seen him draw a sign like this in multiple of his books. It's just very strange. It just adds to the strangeness. I can't think of any other function. I'm curious if you can, but oh, you're
Yeah,
talking
no, I
about
mean,
this type of stuff.
yeah. I also quite like that quite extreme, slightly rear upper lighting there.
Right here.
On the last panel.
Yeah, I've always liked that type of lighting. That's something I've always ripped off. I don't know what any of that adds up to other than him just, well, I mean, this book is, it's psychoanalytical, so I think part of it is he just has to let himself be in the flow. I think that's just part of what he does, maybe.
Right.
And yeah,
Eh,
this is the stuff where I think, like, this is what a real, she's still sexy, but if like a
yeah,
real
incredibly.
woman bends
Yeah.
over, her belly is gonna,
Right.
and that's sexier to me now as an adult.
Right.
There's scenes in Cerebus too where Dave does that, where there's like one pube poking through an underwear, and you're like, that's the sexiest thing I've ever seen. Yeah, here he starts talking about Camille Paglia, and like, what kid, is talking about Camille Paglia, who I haven't read her a lot. I've never read anything by her, but I've seen a number of speeches by her, and she's like an interesting, and this is going back to the gender identity thing. She's an interesting feminist thinker that holds masculinity up. Like,
Hmm.
she holds on to like gender categories as
Right.
like the masculine and feminine,
Or
and
sex
celebrates
categories anyway.
masculinity,
Yeah. Right.
and identifies as masculine herself, but isn't, she's not saying, oh, I'm a man, but she
Yeah.
identifies with the masculine. And I think Julie is a Paglia fan, because she seems to be like, I'm a strong woman, you're blaming this on me.
Right. And even in the first few issues, we have an idea that that's a sort of defense mechanism, um, that she's putting on. But
The
this
tough,
whole right, and this whole dialogue here is quite extraordinary. And as much as I was you know poo pooing the doorknob coloration, the color choices themselves are fairly interesting. Um, I really,
this right here especially is really
yeah.
beautiful and painterly. So even the fade here, um, I think they do. This is one of the better. I'm kind of sad they recolored it, because I've seen some of the recolors, and the oddity of the colors has left. I don't like this recoloring, because they usually get rid of the weirdness of the original colors, and I think that's just kind of part of the vibe that you have to stick with.
That's a pretty incredible splash page right there. Or so she's having the doll reaction, and she's gonna get him in the jugular with the is tooth. Um, so this is the villain, Mr. Gone, that we've been referring to before, but he has a sort of taunting relationship with Julie. And one of the things in the early issues is that basically the confusion of reality and fantasy, and Max wondering what's happening when he's inside of this um, savannah, and fighting the is there in the savannah, and seeing Julie as a leopard queen. And
There's the
the
leopard queen.
Mr. Gone consistently refers to Max as a Brer Lapin, um, as in Lapin being French word for rabbit. Which, look at those chompers there.
Well, and I mean, that's on this cover too, right? He's got the bunny ears.
Oh, interesting.
That's a foreshadowing. I think it happens in this volume, right? They come out that he was her rabbit. He was a rabbit that she had as a kid. That's her spirit animal. Like the rabbit thing is intentional.
Hmm.
It's a very strange book in that the way it messes with reality. It seems like the outback is potentially all psychological interpretation, then it becomes a real place again, and it becomes just psychological interpretation, and it kind of goes back and forth. And then everyone has their own outback, which is basically their way of dealing with their past trauma, is
Hmm.
they form these outback places. So like Julie has formed the outback where she's this, tough Paglia
Queen.
queen lady.
Yeah.
But then somehow has mapped this onto this homeless guy, but then maybe the homeless guy isn't even really a homeless guy. Maybe he is really just the spirit animal rabbit instantiated in the real world. That all continues to get unsettled even more as the series goes on. But here you see immediately there's like a rabbit creature with a claw. So the
Well,
rabbit thing and the Briar Lapin is
yeah.
very intentional.
I don't want to get all psychoanalytical about it, but it is interesting to have a protagonist that might just be a vehicle for someone else's trauma. Um, that is
Yeah,
a
this
very
this book is
interesting,
about Julie.
right? It's a potential relationship dynamic that is, troubling and real in the real world. Um, it's an interesting potential thing as a way to who is being observed to come up with that dynamic.
And that the real
um
protagonist is kind of hiding behind some hero that they've put out to kind of like, it's another way of creating a safe space for yourself, is you put
right.
someone else out ahead of you. And I think that's what the Max is a bit, is like, we're going to hide behind him. The book is called The Max, but really it's Julie's story. Here's the intermixing
Yeah.
of reality. Like the Goodyear blimp is like this big flying whale. And he goes through, he's walking through the city, and it's kind of just like potentially a crazy homeless guy, shouting at lampposts and stuff.
Right.
But in his mind, he's fighting all of these creatures. And then he'll wake up in different places. um
Not recall anything when he's in the outback, so the idea potentially could be that the outback is when he is transitioning there, that he's doing something that he's not going to remember in the real world. um it's interesting. That's a fairly rational take on psychosis compared to sort of the normal superhero psychosis of like they really are the center of the world, they really are the freshly powered person who can do whatever they want. you know Wolverine goes, kills a bar full of people, and we feel he's justified because he's the hero. And this is sort of the flip side of that. You're invited to consider that the person doing the crazy thing is actually crazy.
well, and that the bad guy is maybe the good guy, because Mr. Gone is like this serial killer, but it kind of flips back and forth where maybe he's trying to accomplish something worth accomplishing in the dream world.
Hmm.
There's something leaking into reality that's maybe needs to be contained. And he seems pretty antagonistic in this, but um yeah, there's just all of those. And I think it's an intentional thing. Like he's picking apart, we talk about all these other books like Watchmen that pick apart the tropes, but like kind of not really.
Right.
I think the Max like really goes a lot deeper into it than most books do, and more successfully if you can stick with it. I love this moment too. This is another one of those um sexy moments to me, which is weird, but like
Mm.
he's sitting there clipping her toenails, and then she's like
Right.
chewing on it, which is like, you could go meet like the sexiest girl in the world, but
She still
you
has
know
to clip her nails.
yeah, if you're gonna live together, there's gonna be a moment
Right.
where something like that's gonna happen. And that amount of reality, you always call it well observed. It's such well observed. It's like the
Hmm.
Maggie having her foot flipped up because she stepped on the rock in Love and
Right.
Rockets. That amount of observed behavior slipping into the surreal.
Yeah.
the
Right.
real and the surreal mixing is really magical and charming.
What do you think of this uh, non non-bound sunset, digital sunset behind them here?
I like that. I think this is one of the ones I've seen recolored, and I don't like it as much.
Did the recoloring have anything in the background?
I don't remember. Yeah, it's just the colors aren't as weird and intense. I don't think we
Hmm.
would have to pull it up and look at it,
Yeah,
but
that might be a good other video at some point.
yeah, some
I'd be
recoloring
curious.
video. What, like, why are you
Oh, I
you
was just
like it?
wondering because the first one of those splash pages we get with the two of them basically being the entire center of the page doesn't have any kind of other things happening. It's her eyes uh, splashed up in the sky, and he's kind of glancing back up at her. And there's no color imposed on the white space, and so we get this sort of floating dreamlike quality to it. Um, yeah, that's the one.
Where she's like he's in her dream more,
Yeah,
and now they're in it together.
but something about that white is very, very compelling. It's basically honoring his original composition. When I say original, it's honoring the line art composition. Now, whether or not he put a little doodle in there and said, "Please give me a nuclear sky behind them," maybe that's it. But
Also, you
you know,
think this is the colorist taking too many liberties?
yeah, I'm not sure. It becomes less about their figures in space, um, comparatively to those two pages. Anyway, I'd be
Well,
curious
and
to
it
see what.
it offsets the composition is way more like totemic over here. As soon as you
Right,
put those horizontals, it's different.
that's
I
true.
don't know. I guess see, the other thing is I'm coming back to all this after experiencing later Sam Kieth, where he does paint a lot more.
Right,
So all
which
of
he's
this,
fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
absolutely mind bending texture.
And he always has area, and I think he starts in this volume, but he always has areas where he paints and then areas where they color it digitally.
Right.
And whoever he works with, that they've gotten really good at blending
Hmm.
those two things together, which has to be a real pain in the ass as a colorist. Like, okay, this panel's painted, and then now I got to go digitally color this. But I guess to me, like, coming back to Max after having really been exposed to his later work, that just seems like it fits to me, that you'd have an
Interesting.
area that has no ink work but is all color.
Right.
Maybe that's not as distressing to me. That's a great composition right there.
Yeah.
And dad, and so you start to get the sense that Mr. Gone has some other relationship, and they introduce a new character entirely. Like, you almost think Julie's story's over, and then now you're talking about Sarah.
Right. That first cover there, by the way, that cover is another, image, screaming image from that pose. It's a death blow. What is it that has that particular like superhero butt? You know, it it
Probably.
it's interesting how he takes he's sort of peppered in the sort of early image tropes into these first few things while
Talk
totally
about
ignoring them in
doorknob.
tone. Right.
No, I think he did it well, and he's subverting it all well, but he also knows, like, you gotta have it in there to sell it, and that it's just gonna let me stuff all this other things in
Right.
there. I love this, but there's starting to be a hint that that might be Mr. Gone. It looks like him.
Right.
And then the mom,
And Sarah's hair is the hair that Sam Kieth was born to draw. We're talking about cartoonist impulses. Once you start doing something that you're like, yes, that thing, it's very tempting to just do it. Right. I
I
mean,
think that's his hair though. Like, he has real curly,
yeah, okay, well,
dark hair, doesn't he?
I don't know. I'd never seen an image of the man.
I think he has really dark, curly, like Jerry curl hair. Um, and then right here, I love that he has someone literally throwing tomatoes at Death, from because he was the first artist on Sandman. I don't think he designed Death. I think that was the issue after he left that she shows up. But Death is hard and cold and ugly, not some cute chick. And he's just got, I was like he's literally throwing shade, throwing tomatoes at the book that
Nightshade,
he helped create.
throwing Nightshade.
Yeah, it's funny.
Nightshade is a type of tomato.
Yeah. but I think, and then you get I don't know where this one, but like everyone had, I guess Star Trek Next Generation must have been a thing.
Right.
Everyone had those damn visors. Like Frank Miller always had his thugs with those visors.
I love that giant foreground arm, just dominating the whole page.
Yeah, and the Max is always just like a chunk in the composition. I love that. And then Julie comes back and you realize she's related to Sarah and her mom. And then they have an argument. I love this. They have an argument about Steinem versus Paglia. And it's like, what superhero comic is having an argument about Gloria Steinem versus Camille Paglia? Like, other than Cerebus having two competing views of feminism in it, right?
Right. It's easy to miss the Mucha influence because of the rendering, and but it is all over the panel design. Yeah, that right there, that inset circle with the column building up to it. That and the arch, both those two pages right there, very strong Mucha influence. Although it might be like third or fourth generation Mucha, like show posters from the 60s and 70s influence or something.
Yeah, that could see that psychedelic aspect. It's so weird that Mucha got tied into the psychedelics, because I don't think that was a component of his art at all.
No.
But yeah, it makes more sense to me to be coming from because there is such like
Right.
like rock and roll, like the big bell bottoms. That has to be where it's coming from. Such awful Sam Kieth. I'm sorry, you're one of my favorite artists, favorite comic writers of all time, but bro, you don't be a fashion designer. It's terrible. I don't even know what I wrote there. Balucci?
You didn't want to talk about his trench coat?
No. Oh, I guess I put a question mark. They reference someone. Falucci is a paranoid and you're worse. That was just a joke. Oh, I think I was wondering who that is as a writer, since they will reference like Steinem and Paglia. They talk about a ditzy secretary reading Falucci's book. So I wonder if that was also a feminist writer. Not only did it semi-endorse prostitution, but did you catch the bit about the ditzy secretary reading Falucci's book Backlash? So what's the message there? Feminists or airheads? So I'm curious who that is, because the other two are like very well-known feminist writers, but I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So if anyone knows, let us know. Was there actually a book Backlash? We'll have to go look that up.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody obvious.
And then I love this. You talk about the great writing, the great dialogue. There's this bit here where he's been underneath the freeway talking to Sarah, and she says, I thought once I decided not to kill myself, things would be better, but I still feel just as empty as ever, after she's decided to keep living. And he said, pain lasts, kid. It's how you know you're alive. Sometimes I think this whole growing up business is just pain management. And given how both of our bodies have been falling apart in the last couple of weeks, that really resonated with me. It's like man, such a true harsh lesson.
This is my favorite great cover of the early issues.
Yeah, me too. This is the one I think like something and it looks like I don't know, that's the Max image to me. That and the him in the jail that I associate with the MTV.
And that's just fantastic right there. So I wanted to ask you about these overlays where you're seeing a different reality imposed on top. I've been trying to, piece together through my brain as we were flipping through this, where have I seen those two particular things before? We talked about Richard McGuire's short story Here that was published in like 89 or something, has that where the insets are time. I can think of a few examples from Cerebus and Rick's story, but that's later than this. That's like 2000 or something. where you're seeing insets that reflect the psychosis of the people who are, you know,
Yeah.
seeing it.
Yeah, where it's like mapped over and you got the monster face that he's seen. Yeah.
Right. So what are the other origins of this, do you think?
I don't know. There's a couple much later examples I can think of. Not that well, there's a couple I've seen where there's a thought balloon. I actually had a student who did that once and it blew my mind. He had like a thought balloon mapped over like what the character was seeing of reality,
Mhm.
like going to high school and the thought balloon covering up the actual sign of the high school and it just said hell, you
Right.
know. So I thought that was cool because it was like the thought balloon on top of it. That was a kid I had when I taught a summer class on comics, and I've seen a couple other artists do that trick. I think that kid was the first time I'd seen it though. It was really like, man, you're what, 14 and you came up with that? Oh my god! But not like this. I can't think of. There's a book by Grant Morrison and Sean Gordon Murphy too called Joe's Barbarian or Joe the Barbarian that I really love, where the kid's going into diabetic shock,
Hmm.
but they don't have insets like this. It will show a panel of him like washing his head in the bathtub, and then the next panel is the fantasy world where it's like him washing his head under this big pipe, and his little pet rat's like this gigantic warrior creature.
Reason I'm making a big deal about this is just because this is another one of those things that you would have a difficult time imagining how you'd show outside of comics.
Yeah, and but you're also like, where did this come from? Is this unique to Sam
Yeah.
Kieth? Is he the first one that came up with it?
Yeah, no,
I
and
don't
I
I don't
think
know.
Richard McGuire here predates this by, at least a few years. But that's only used for time in
And
that
not with
particular
this
case.
weird, like
Yeah.
the weird symbols add to it. But again, like the superhero in the fetal position, the kind of foot fetish thing, like that's all really interesting to me as well. And then this whole issue, this is where you start to see him as the rabbit.
Right.
Like they start to associate him with the rabbit more. I don't think it's totally come out yet. But I was wondering also if because he's saying, I'm like just gonna be some kind of stupid cartoon. And then he switches, I like this, he switches into this cartoon style Max.
Right.
I wonder if at this point he knew, or the MTV cartoon had already come out or not, or he knew that they were getting that deal.
Yeah, I don't think that it would have come out yet because I think it came out in 95. But yeah, I'm not sure.
But
That's a
like
good
he was
question.
maybe aware that it was under development.
Right. I think I
and
would I would guess, yeah.
and so he was like having that's what this issue feels like to me, is he was having qualms about
Right.
a cartoon being made. I like the style swap. I hate the rhyming. I really hate reading Dr. Seuss rhyming. I don't know how you feel about that. Like
It is what it is.
Demon, the book, the character Demon in DC. I hate every time he shows up because he always has to rhyme and I just skip whatever he says. And then here, oh, I guess you don't see it. He starts taking off his mask. There's an interesting explanation for his mask later on too.
This is a really nice. I've used this a few times myself, um, to lesser effect. This great single image behind the narrow panels moving horizontally across the page. That's a really nice combination because it enables you to read those beats all infused with the meaning of the background parts.
Something. Oh no, that's just I thought that was a ring. And just the switch to the sepia tone. But I really like to play with style in this issue. That's a very Cerebus
Yeah.
type of panel, except he gets crazier with it. He adds that image
Right.
extreme to it.
That's essentially the same effect as the other page I was talking about too.
And this is where it starts to get too superhero for you, when you start having the Savage Dragon and stuff show up.
Exactly. As a kid reading it, that was because by this time, we're talking 6 months have passed, or 7 months or 8 months or whatever, because the books were always late.
Yeah.
I had transitioned to other kinds of comics, and so when it kept on hitting the bell the superhero bell, I started getting a little bit like wary of it, you know.
On the
So
on
I
the reread, did you like do you see what they're doing in it more though, where it's not just taking a turn into the superhero books?
yes, no, I didn't have the same experience with it passing through this time. It's just I was just sort of observing the things that I was like clocking as a kid, you know, that didn't
Yeah,
bother me about the first few episodes or issues.
because they have this big argument about violence in video
Right.
games and shows, and one of the, like, Julie is taking the non-censorship, and saying like, I mean, here we are just hanging out getting tan, hardly glamorous, but someone could read pinups. I'm just in the way I'm standing here. And this is the Jeff Jones, like
Right.
absolutely Jeff Jones figure. And then Sarah's mom, so she's taking the Paglia stance, and then she's taking what I assume is the Steinem stance. Maybe, but I don't want Sarah to grow up in a world filled with violence and fear and gender hatred. So that to me seems really early that he'd be talking about that in the 90s. I mean, this seems like contemporary dialogue to me. She's at the hospital today picking up one of her friends who was attacked by that serial rapist a few months ago. My women's group is going to be monitoring TV show for violent content. Like, I'm no censor, Julie, but kids see so much bad stuff in that. And that's early to me, because my idea of like leftist, and I shouldn't say it that way,
Yeah.
liberal stuff, which is the, where I was at, is this like everything goes, and I never would have attached that to censorship in the way
Yeah. Well,
that
you got
it's
to think about
become today.
a lot of the public conversation in the 80s was around like music form and things like that. You had people who, you know, like Tipper Gore, who really pushed hard to have a labeling standard for albums, essentially. And yeah, so I think that this conversation has come in and out. I think this thread of, you know, let it all hang out versus, you know, what about the children,
Yeah.
has come in and out of public discourse and has actually, you know, flopped sides a lot as well.
But I always
Each
saw it as a religious thing, maybe because I grew up in a religious environment. I was aware
right.
of all that, but as though it was always, I know, Tipper Gore obviously would be a Democrat, but to me, it was always like people who were more religious and conservative.
Yeah, focused on
Uh,
the family or and you know, something like that. But they, yeah, it really has sort of flipped back and forth. It's been a sort of pendulum swing for what political pole that conversation is happening. It's interesting to see it here.
yeah, and so it's interesting to have it feel like this feels like where it's at today, as it's coming more from the left. And then you get Calvin and Hobbes. And I thought, especially right after this page, where it feels like contemporary dialogue, they say, "Hey, you're the dragon," and he says, "That's my pronoun, son. Don't wear it out." And I thought, wow, Sam Kieth, you're like really 27 years ahead of time. So even when they do introduce these other superheroes, you just weren't seeing it, Sean. Yeah, and then they have Mako the shark. So this whole issue to me, I think, is really like, it seems like stupid superhero violence, but it's making fun of that and also making a censorship argument.
There's some painted work there.
The first time he does painted work in the Maxx.
Like I
And
said, this
that's
was
100% Frazetta.
right. I found it difficult at the time. I was like, well, he could be doing that all the time.
Yeah, he could be. He does more and more as it goes. But yeah, that blew my mind. That's always blown my mind about his work. And yeah, how do you make the choice of when to do which? Because on this page, there's a number of spots where, well, I think this whole
Hmm.
page is painted, really. Yeah, the whole
Hmm.
page is painted. And then right back to this stuff.
Yeah.
And just chords. Like, he's even making fun of his own proclivity to draw these. My claws are free. So I don't know. I think it's a really sophisticated book. No, I would have left it at just, oh, here's some more beautiful painted stuff. I would have left it at, we could probably just move on and never go back to it. But now knowing that you haven't read the rest of it, we're gonna have to
No,
come
I
back to
didn't. I
this.
didn't get much further than this right here. And maybe another issue or two. But no, the Savage Dragon and the Savage Dragon villain thing, that was just when I was just like, whoa. Right. It still is one of these books. I forgot, it just, you know how if you break up with somebody and they have a certain kind of annoying thing or some reason that they really, rubbed you the wrong way, you could be sensitized to that for the next like 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, you'll
Every
see the
time you
one
meet,
thing.
exactly. And every time you meet somebody who has that any whiff of that one thing, you're just like, oh. I had broken up with the superhero, and reading something that had that kind of stuff in there, even if it was being held up to ridicule, like you're absolutely right. Like, it was just too much, it was just like, oh, can't do that. Don't want to
Yeah.
do that.
Well, and especially if you dated like 5 people and there tends to be a common thread
Sure.
between them, and you're like, okay, I keep making this mistake.
Right.
Like, and you're like, I'm not doing that again. And so, yeah, superheroes would be like, I've made that mistake like 20 times now.
Right.
I'm not doing that again.
I
Yeah,
have
that
a
makes
copy.
sense.
I have a copy of Ninjak *1 over here.
Hey, that's
You know
Joe
what I mean?
Quesada, though. That's some awesome art in that book. I've never given up on superheroes. I still like superhero stuff. I'll admit it's taken until this last year where it's getting tedious for me. As long as it had good art, I was always like, yeah, cool. Or certain, good writers, and I've always liked superhero stuff. But we definitely have to keep going with the Max, because
Yeah.
I think you'll be super impressed with where it goes from here.
Any idea if there's ever been a black and white edition?
They've done artist editions
Mm.
of the Max, and some of his stuff from Marvel, I think, but they're out of print. They're ridiculously expensive to get a hold of now.
Okay.
But yeah, I would love to get those at some point.
Well, thanks for watching along with us on the Max, and we are going to go make another video right now where we're going to recreate some Sam Kieth art. I don't think that we got a Max. I think we're going to be looking at everyone's favorite Canadian.
Yeah, it was too, when I searched just to find some image to print out and trace over, basically there wasn't any really good high-res shots from the Max, and a lot of the texture work that he does wasn't so obvious in a lot of the Max stuff, because I think he knew the coloring. So I think what people wanted to see was all those texture techniques. So
yeah, and I'm working on a cover for a project that Carson is also working on a cover for. Don't tell anybody. And I think some of these textures that we're going to be putting together are going to be of use.
Oh, okay, cool. That'll be awesome. All right, well, join us probably tomorrow or the next day for our Sam Kieth inking tutorial video.
Yeah. And in the meanwhile, if you are interested in getting a book that is also an inking tutorial of sorts, pick up The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, available in fine comic stores and bookstores.
It's hidden by my camera. There's one up.
You can see a few up there, yeah. Available in fine comic book stores and bookstores worldwide now at this point. And also available from from us. If you go to livinglinebooks.com, you can pick up a digital edition of the book, or you can get a copy signed by Carson and Dave. And depending on how many people take us up on this offer right now, it might be mailed from my house, or it might be mailed from Carson's house.
I didn't know we were operating this. So yeah, I've got a few Strange Deaths, and I've got a few signed unnumbered book plates where both Dave and I have signed it. So if you do want a signed unnumbered copy, we can provide those things.
Hit us up at livinglinebooks.com, and thanks for watching.